Welcome to the MSDW podcast. I'm Jason Gumpert, editor at msdynamicsworld.com. On this episode, we're talking about Microsoft's latest desktop as a service lineup. Windows 365 and Azure Virtual Desktop both have their strengths. And to help make sense of these options, I'm joined by Jason Valanzano, Senior Technical Solution Architect for Managed Services at Columbus. This episode is sponsored by Columbus, and Jason helps lay out the basics for us. Then he explains some of the differentiating factors that help determine which option is the best in any particular scenario. Factors like onboarding, computing load, security, and the complexity of the surrounding IT environment are all key, he says. But don't underestimate the employee experience benefits of the right desktop as a service offering either. In a tight labor market, benefits like flexible work location, streamlined IT support, and choice of device can all help. Okay, well, Jason Valanzano, welcome to the podcast. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me. Good to be here.
Why don't we start with a bit of an introduction? Can you tell us about yourself?
Yeah, so I am currently working as a senior technical solution architect with Columbus Global. I work in the infrastructure managed services group. And prior to that, I've been doing a lot of engineering and architecture work within the cloud space with Microsoft, work with several Microsoft partners. So basically anything from Dynamics and security are all fair game with me.
All right, excellent. Well, welcome. And I'm looking forward to learning a little bit more about your perspective on desktop as a service. It's an area that Microsoft has been updating its own product line on recently, and there's some important new changes and things to understand. So I'm hoping you can guide us through it a bit here. Why don't we start with a general definition? So talking about desktop as a service, how do you define it?
Just like we've all been comfortable and used to utilizing and consuming things like email and Microsoft 365 apps from the cloud, desktop as a service is really kind of an umbrella service where providers, a third-party provider like Microsoft, for example, will provide you with that environment virtually at your location and handle all of the infrastructure and handle all of the, all of the stack, all of the application stack that's involved with hosting a desktop solution, whether that's Microsoft operating system or Linux operating system. So in general, it's a virtual workspace. And it's the reason I'm sure we're talking about it is that's becoming the new norm, right? Post-COVID. So that's it in a nutshell.
When it comes to what Microsoft has to offer, it's kind of evolved recently, right? There was Windows Virtual Desktop. We now have Azure Virtual Desktop and Windows 365 as well, which is even, I guess, the newest of the offerings, at least from what I've seen in sort of the way the announcements have rolled out over time. Why don't we start with Windows 365? That's Microsoft kind of made a big splash with that announcement. I think my sense anyway was that they were pushing it out really as quickly into the market as they felt they could. But what is Windows 365 just as a starting point?
Absolutely. They did make a big splash, especially at Ignite this past month. It really is the evolution of Microsoft's journey of this digital transformation revolution, right? That we've all undertaken and expedited ever since the work style has changed in our offices to our houses to anywhere. And so what Windows 365 they call it hybrid Windows for a hybrid world. That's kind of a good way to sum it up. And it's an experience where you actually have your PC is in the cloud. That's the best way to describe it. It gives you the flexibility of being able to leverage, older hardware, to an extent. But really, you can take your PC virtually with you anywhere you go. As long as you have an internet connection, you can work from, play from, do whatever you need to with your Windows 365 server. So it's a subscription-based model. So it's a little bit different than what people might be used to when it comes to Windows Virtual Desktop or now Azure Virtual Desktop, which is more of a consumption model. I might be getting ahead of myself here, but back to Windows 365. The cool news, I think, the biggest news is probably that it supports Windows 11, which is probably another podcast in and of itself. But Windows 10, Windows 11, it's predictable pricing, so it how much you're going to pay per month per user, and it's really the simplest. If you have a simple need for a basic Windows environment, it's a great solution. It's fixed cost, it's predictable, and it's performant.
All right. And before we go too much further, then we probably should just circle back and Maybe you can tell us a little bit more about why and how Azure Virtual Desktop, as you mentioned, is a little bit different from Windows 365.
So just to set the technical baseline here, both of these solutions, Windows 365 and Azure Virtual Desktop, they're both operated and maintained in Azure. Okay, so just understand that we're talking about a Microsoft data center somewhere in the world hosting a virtual PC, a virtual machine, a VM, with all of the bells and whistles that come along with a cloud-based service, such as, the security aspects, the economies of scale that you get with Azure products. So I just wanted to make sure that was understood. Windows 365 isn't some completely adjunct concept or service. It's really built upon the same platform that other VM and virtualized services have been built by Microsoft. So Azure Virtual Desktop, AVD, it's more than just a rebrand. Some people say, oh, they just rebranded, Windows Virtual Desktop, which is their original entry into what we call Virtual Desktop Infrastructure, or VDI, or instance. VDI is kind of the common term, but it's really it also offers Windows 10 and Windows 11, but it gives you a lot more control. So when we're talking about enterprise, when we're talking about global employees, when we're talking about maybe some more control and customization when it comes to applications and things that require more IT involvement, and it's not just an out of the box, I just give me a Windows screen with a start menu. You're definitely you're trudging into the land of Azure Virtual Desktop. And just one other point to make, I forgot to mention so Windows 365 does come in two general flavors. It's the business plan, which is the simplest one. And then there is an enterprise plan, which is a little bit more complex and a little bit more bells and whistles. And the enterprise plan is probably the most comparable to Azure Virtual Desktop when you start breaking it down as far as features, security, endpoint management, all those things. AVD, Azure Virtual Desktop, is going to give you the most flexibility. But there are certain use cases where it may not be the best fit. And I'm sure we'll talk about that. But that's AVD in a nutshell.
I am interested to hear what maybe you would consider the right fit on really either of those. Do you want to maybe start with AVD, since you were sort of going down that road in terms of what some of the differences are and where the right fit might be for that?
There's a couple of things that would stand out. So if you're going to go through, a flow chart or a decision tree as to, do I need Windows Virtual Desktop Enterprise or do I need Azure Virtual Desktop? You'd go through a decision tree, and some of the things that might skew you towards AVD are things like multi-session billing, right? So you can pool your users in an AVD environment, whereas with Windows 365, you're gonna have a fixed rate per user. So, the cost model is a bit different, and the economies of scale, if you have a larger enterprise and you're used to auto scaling and you maybe have some seasonal requirements for your compute resources, AVD is probably a more cost-friendly solution. But just like anything else with software and these cloud-based services, you get, flexibility comes with complexity and vice versa. So the other thing that I would say, it also now they just announced recently that it supports Windows 11 now again. So for what that's worth to those, the new Windows 11 operating system. And it also, when it comes to performance and hybrid type environments, like if you need on-prem access and you need data sovereignty, for example, this is what AVD is built for, right? It has remote app for streaming, and it handles those kinds of hybrid type of environments much more elegantly, much more smoothly with remote desktop and remote app. So this environment, AVD, is really the best solution, in my opinion, if you're looking at those kinds of things. So you start breaking it down. First of all, you have to make a decision. Hey, which camp am I going in here? If you're already an Azure customer and you're already using, VMs and you're familiar with Active Directory and all those things, because and I know this isn't a real technical podcast this time, but there are those components of requiring Active Directory and Intune licenses if you're going to be using these more advanced virtual desktop solutions. Whereas Microsoft 365, it's really like, I heard some guy describe it as, at least for the business version, the simple version, instead of going down to the computer store, buying your computer, buying the software, going back home, loading it up, then maintaining it and upgrading it and all those things. Now you just, a couple clicks and you could literally buy the license right from your home office. And within 30 minutes, you have a pre-configured, whether you need 2 virtual CPUs, 4 virtual CPUs, whatever memory, whatever RAM, all those things are configurable and priced accordingly. And so the use cases are what I kind of work backwards from there, right? What is my use case? Do I just have employees that are global travelers? Do I have employees that are used to an application that I'm still hosting on-prem in my data center and I have a hybrid account and I want to leverage that infrastructure? Do I have to build out any new Active Directory infrastructure or any kind of Azure Active Directory? So these things need to be considered when you're looking at the features and functionality. And that's how I would answer that question.
When it comes to pricing, does that have a major impact on the decision making? You mentioned a lot of other really obviously important factors.
Absolutely. And pricing is a finicky part of this decision, I'd say, because it's hard to just outright say, well, this costs X amount per month and that one costs Y per month. True. But when we start crossing the line between Windows 365 Business, for example, and Azure Virtual Desktop, they're just it's apples and oranges as far as the environment's concerned. So you do have to have that in mind, and you do have to appreciate the fact if you are an existing Microsoft customer, especially in enterprise and business, if you have services in Azure in the cloud, Azure is already part of your environment, then you're leveraging those existing assets and those existing components. So adding Azure Virtual Desktop is probably much more compelling, right? Whereas if you're a small business and you've been a Macintosh shop or whatever, for whatever reason, you're making a switch, you're going through an acquisition and somebody decided, hey, we're just going to refresh everything. I'm buying in on the Microsoft vision. We're going with Windows 365, Windows 11, do it all, then you take a step back and say, okay, what kind of features do we require and what would be nice to have? But at the end of the day, I think this movement, this desktop as a service movement is not only has it been expedited with the hybrid demand, I think there's costs and I don't know. I mean, I can tell you what the monthly rates are. It starts as low as $24 and can go as high as $140. It depends on those components. Just like if you were shopping for a PC at the store, well, how many processors do you want? How much RAM do you need? So those are things to consider. It might be worth paying a little bit more if it's fixed. If it's a license based like Windows 365 is, I might just have that comfort, peace of mind, knowing that I'm not going to have to pay a bunch more if based on utilization or number of use. It's a fixed amount. It's a known cost. So some people, their business models fit better well with that kind of solution. So anyways, what I wanted to go back to, something else. What's the cost of a happy employee, right? What's the price of that? What's the cost of work-life balance to you, right? These are costs that aren't necessarily baked in on a spreadsheet or a cost analyzer model. But for me, I recently came on board with Columbus Global, for example, and that was after an extensive and exhaustive search for a company that I wanted to feel comfortable with, and because they offer me, and well, number one, I like the company and they're a Microsoft Gold partner and all those things, right? But at the end of the day, as far as my work environment and being able to work off of a Mac or a PC, being able to work from my home office, being able to work pretty much anywhere, those kinds of things weigh heavily on a decision for an employee when they're researching companies. And people are changing companies so much right now. I guess my suggestion would be, if you're an IT decision maker, if you're a business decision maker, and you're trying to decide if you need to migrate off of legacy, where you procure the asset, you procure the laptop, you ship it, you handle all that. Maybe you want to move to a more modern virtualized platform like a Windows 365 or an Azure Virtual Desktop, because as you're going to attract more employees because of that flexibility. They'll be able to use their own devices. So that's going to save you some money potentially. And, that kind of modern workplace, providing mobility. And with this service, you could use your Windows app. You can use your Windows desktop on an iPad now. How cool is that? I mean, I personally, I have an Apple ecosystem in my house, and it's nice to be able to, if I'm at the pool and I need to, I get a call and I need to do some work and I happen to have my iPad, I don't have to come back to the house. I don't have to move. I can just log in virtually. So lots of things to think about when it comes to the big pricing question or discussion.
Yeah. And one of the other sort of decision-making elements of it that I wanted to get your feedback on, who's actually making some of these decisions? You mentioned some of the benefits and how maybe some of those decisions should be weighed. I imagine, and you talked a lot about the role that IT needs to play in this. So obviously IT's input is really critical in an organization's decision on which direction to go, which kind of desktop solution to choose. Can you talk any more about who else is involved in some of this decision making? What I'm thinking of administration, of even like line of business requirements and needs, as well as what the IT team can really bring to it?
I guess depending on the size and the scale of what you're trying to accomplish, if you're a small business and you have an MSP, for example, it may be a pretty simple decision because if your applications aren't changing, if you're comfortable and satisfied with where you're at with your current workflows, with your current applications and software, then maybe you just need to go as far as the owner and that's it, and you don't have to talk to the end users. However, in most cases in today's world, times have changed, and not just computing wise, but how we consume things, how we work, how we play, all those things, how we pick up food from a restaurant nowadays. There's so many different things that are forcing active mobility when it comes to working that I think that if you're going to make a change, first of all, you should always step back and say, wait, before we do this, is there room for improvement? Is there room for leveraging existing assets? Is it time to sunset some workflows or some applications that are outdated? Now is the time when digital transformation is in full effect. And so, sometimes the end users I speak of, sometimes they are uncomfortable with change. And sometimes it's more of a philosophical process than it is a technical one. And that goes for a lot of different things, not just your desktop, but a lot of technical decisions come down to the line of business apps. So I would say, if you're looking at a Azure virtual desktop, if it's new, if it's something that's relatively new to your organization, you might want to put like a little team together and have a representative from each of your departments, certainly IT. But, you might want to, you never know who's going to say, hey, raise a hand and say, hey, oh, you know what? We need that application, or, oh, no, this is so, our users have been complaining about this for 6 months. This application is a hog, So, now's the time to really evaluate your workflows, your apps, and maybe make some changes and then move forward from there. So it does take a village on these bigger decisions. The simpler ones, as far as you got 25 employees or less, and they just need a Windows environment that could run Outlook on the web and all of the 365 apps, then you can get by with just Windows Business and Windows 365 Business and keep it simple and work on your more important things than managing your operating system and patching and all that good stuff.
Yeah, I was trying to think of other cases where there might be important considerations. I mean, the one that came to my mind first was like an engineering team with, really serious workstations for doing 3D modeling and analysis and simulation, for example. I don't know if we want to talk specific scenarios or it's too dependent on the case, but do things like that where they need a lot of processing power, does that factor into which direction you might go?
Yes, I'm glad you brought that up. It absolutely does. That's an immediate indicator that you don't want to be messing really with Windows 365. It's certainly not the business flavor, because the way that's structured as a consumer, it's a license-based fixed purchase. You buy 1 or 2 virtual CPUs and only 8 gig of RAM and all this stuff. That's what you get for your bill, unless you decide to cancel that one and upgrade. Whereas on enterprise, at least you have the flexibility to be able to upgrade the cloud PVC, right? So there's a little bit more flexibility there. But even then, if you're talking about 3D graphics, gaming, anything gaming related, anything that's going to, require GPU load or, any kind of more IO intensive workflows, I would definitely start looking with Azure Virtual Desktop and work backwards from there. And if you can, maybe it's a hybrid, maybe it's not one size fits all. Parts of your business might not require, like most businesses, you might have a team that require those kinds of high compute resources and processing, and maybe you're doing some machine learning or AI, and those things need some more horsepower. You're much more set up for success if you're in the AVD world and you're able to leverage remote apps and the remote desktop experience. And again, it's pooled. If you've got 50 engineers across the world, you could set up an environment where, follow the sun type of workflows and all these things so that you can save some money by leveraging the pooled model that comes with AVD. So there is definitely, that's an important part. And that's probably the IT group's role here would be, hey, what kind of processing power are we looking at? How often do we need it? Where do we need it? I neglected to mention this, but you just made me think of this. The other thing that if we're talking, I'm not talking a small business that's in one city and that's it. But if we're talking a business that has some footprint, whether it's nationally here in the US or perhaps it's they're growing internationally, or maybe you're a multinational corporation already and you got offices all over the place. You're blind when it comes to Windows 365, especially the business plan. You have no choice in where you want that virtual machine to live. So at the end of the day, you got to remember there is hardware, there is, cabling and power and all that stuff somewhere in the world that's serving your mouse clicks, right? So with a global team, you might want to be able to assign regionally based upon the data center location of Microsoft, in this case, in this example. You might have people in Europe, you might have people in Asia. You can direct where they're going to consume their virtual desktops from. So for latency purposes and all the things that go along with having not to have to cross the pond for every click of the mouse, those kinds of things are available in Azure Virtual Desktop and Windows 365 Enterprise Edition. So the cost between business and enterprise is I think it's about a $4 on average, a little bit $4 more for enterprise versus business. So, 20 versus 24 at the very low end. You're probably looking at about $30 to $40 somewhere in there for most use cases for just Windows. But like I said, depending on if you're a developer, if you're working in graphic design or any of these things that require some GPU or that requires some faster processing, then you're going to be looking, probably more in the $100 to $150 range, somewhere up in that spectrum. And, if you're running 8 CPU cores, et cetera. So the good news is it's flexible enough that you get to choose that, and you don't even have to go to the store, and you don't have to maintain it, and you don't have to, worry about patching. And I'm not evangelizing Microsoft here per se, but just that movement as we opened with, right? Desktop as a service, this whole move of hybrid work environments and hybrid infrastructures to support it, because we've all crawled out of the office, really. I mean, not all of us, but, even retailers and all these, the way that we're doing business now is dramatically changing the way that companies like Microsoft and Columbus Global, partners of Microsoft that are, equipped to help you, by the way, with these decisions and challenges and migrations. Those things I think are happening at a very rapid pace. If you have any doubt, just go listen to some of the Microsoft Ignite replays. It's pretty impressive.
Yeah, I mean, I can even go as nearby as past episodes of this podcast, talking to subject matter experts in a range of areas. I mean, so much of the pressure that they've been helping their clients with has been around adjusting to a workforce that's not all in the office anymore. And as you know as well, so many different ways in which that's affected the way work gets done. Like you mentioned, shipping laptops or having to, if there were paper processes, having to deal with that, loading software and all the IT challenges that go along with that too. So yeah, it's really sort of a continuing, ongoing challenge for businesses. And depending on how well prepared they were ahead of time prior to early 2020 has sort of determined a bit of how much work they've had to do now to adjust.
You made me just think of another angle to this whole conversation. I recently did a webinar on ransomware. Right. For that webinar, I was looking back at some of the high-profile ransomware attacks that have happened in the past year. The webinar was Hackers This Holiday. That was the title of it. And I went back, and it started with SolarWinds back in the end of 2020. That was a ridiculous attack, that was highly profiled. And there was more involved there, but more other high-profile accounts that I won't name here, but basically at the end of the day, the scary part is the supply chain. And we all know how crippled we are right now with supply chain. And so Acer was one of those examples. Acer got attacked, and they were hit again just as recent as May this year. And, computers weren't available. You talk about just logistics, right? Shipping and tracking and all the things that logistics is responsible for just to maintain assets and the delivery. Well, heck, if it can't even get there, if it's sitting in a dock somewhere in LA and it needs to get to Kansas City, this is where the power of cloud. The cloud is almost an insurance. It's almost a disaster recovery benefit without even thinking about that component. So when you think about, it goes back to that price thing I was talking about before. Some of it's soft and not so hard cost. It's beyond just the cost of the license per month. It's peace of mind. It's knowing that you're being secured by some of the most advanced threat protection software in the world. And you have the flexibility of spinning up new devices literally within 30 minutes, right? If not faster, once you get it down. So as far as continuity, business continuity, and the things that cost us a lot of money when they're down, a lot. I mean, ransomware, I was using that as an example. The cost of the ransom itself, whether it's $10 million, whether it's $40 million, that's not even the total cost of a ransomware attack when you include the downtime, when you include the resources, the human resources, all of the time to restore your data, to pay for those resources. Maybe you have to bring in a consultant to help, mitigate the breach, all that stuff. The cost of brand embarrassment, brand integrity, all those things are costs that need to be considered, at least at a high level, when you're making decisions of going virtual with your infrastructure and your desktops, because it's just where it's going. It's where things are going. I'm excited to see it progressing so quickly.
I did want to touch on onboarding. I think we've covered it a little bit, but are there any other differences that people should know about between the two options when you're actually onboarding people?
So from an onboarding perspective, there's licensing considerations. Let's just start with, Windows 365 Business Edition, right? That's the most basic. That's your basic plan. That's your basic PC in the cloud. Okay. I just want Windows. I want Office 365 and PowerPoint and a start menu, and I'm good. Literally, onboarding is you have to have a Microsoft account. So I guess I should have noted that, but you do have to have a Microsoft account. But then you just purchase the license. But it's individual, and you then have access to your PC. You can go through the configuration process, and you're up and running. Now, when you get into enterprise or AVD, now you're talking about using other tools. I mentioned Intune, and you have to have traditional Active Directory environment for enterprise or AVD. So there's some other licensing requirements, and I don't want to dive into that rabbit hole right here, right now, but do be aware, part of this decision tree, when you're moving to a virtualized desktop environment, you need to take an inventory of what licenses you currently have, what you're planning to get, because there are certain requirements when you go beyond Windows 365 Business. You need a Windows license. You're going to need some Active Directory, etc. So those are my suggestions when considering these technologies. Is make sure you understand where you're at. If you need help with that, that's what MSPs and providers like us can help with, those audits and with those decisions. Because at the end of the day, you want to make sure that you're aware of what all these licenses are doing for you, because sometimes you could be spending money where you don't really need to. And other times you're probably not spending enough where you should be.
Going back to something I mentioned earlier, which near the beginning, Microsoft announcing Windows 365 around Ignite, as you said, and clearly they're eager to get this out into the market. How do you see the competitive landscape of desktop as a service and how these Microsoft offerings fit in?
Yeah, good question. Good question. I'm sure our listeners are probably overwhelmed with the options, right? I mean, the good news is there's a lot of competition out there, which usually in a free market tends to keep the price sane and keeps everybody aggressively sharpening their pencils when it comes to product pricing and all those things. The bad news is there's a lot of competition out there, and it takes time to sift through the pros and cons and all the decision-making process that goes into that. Obviously, there's existing partnerships involved. Here as a gold partner with Microsoft, I have the benefit of being able to be a little bit biased because I'm in on Microsoft. I believe in their products and solutions. And so, I'm not here to bash anybody else, but when you look at the landscape, Citrix, VMware, and then there's a lot of niche providers that, like you brought up the engineering example. Some companies, that's their niche and they might be a good solution for certain customers. But if you are buying into the Microsoft ecosystem, really evaluating what this new Microsoft 365 option to go along with the new Azure virtual desktop solutions, it's really worth taking a look at because of, like I said before, at the end of the day, it's all technology. At the end of the day, we're talking about virtual machines. But Microsoft is keeping up. They just announced virtual machine version 2's coming out now, in support of this. They got Windows 11 coming out. They've got all of their security assets are being collapsed into like an ecosystem that, their Defender software, their antivirus software, their all of the machine learning and AI that they pull and all the resources that they have to apply their machine learning models to and produce these proactive threat intelligence actions to protect their customers. Those kinds of things are what bring value to a provider like Microsoft. So yes, there's lots of competition. Yes, there's lots of options. At the end of the day, the basic technology of providing a virtual desktop on a existing bring your own device laptop or on a Apple iPad, it's going to be available from whomever. However, the real value add comes into what else am I getting? What's powering the security intelligence behind this environment? How many data centers does this provider have? Are they global? Are they truly global? What kind of content distribution network do they have? All these things, Microsoft might not be the cheapest, but that's somebody that I would definitely put in the consideration bucket and grab yourself a partner to help you with these decisions and with this deployment as needed.
Well, Jason, thanks so much for taking the time to run through all these details with me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure. Great talking to you. I hope you'll have me back sometime.
This has been another episode of the MSDW podcast. My thanks to Jason and thanks to you for listening. For more information on infrastructure and application management services from Columbus, please see the links in the show notes. And that's it for this episode. To get in touch with me, you can reach me by email, jgumpert@msdynamicsworld.com. Please also follow us on LinkedIn and on Twitter for all of our updates. Until next time, this is MS Dynamics World, signing off.